Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Hey, it's good to be back. G News is back after a break for about 10 days. And I thought I would just start today by saying hi everyone. Thanks for all your support while I was on minimal posting over the last 10 days because Vicky needed a holiday and she did get that. And at the moment she's talking to her dad about all the highlights of the things that she saw and did in the last 10 days. But for me, it's really just a review. What happened while I was not here in a little bit more detail. So let's skip through some of that. When I left, we had been outraged by the way that the government had stolen $12.8 billion off low-income working women, mostly working women in sectors where people were low paid, through just a grab of pay equity funds. And they had chosen not to prove their claims that all of these savings, which were really cuts, were in fact justified. There was no evidence to justify any of the things that Christopher Luxon was repeating from his spin doctors, that this was about sustainability and that this was about affordability, which shouldn't have been a topic anyway when you talk about pay equity. I mean, pay equity is about equity, not whether you can afford the equity or not. So as you can see, this was kind of like a carefully engineered theft, and theft is the word to use for it. And the nation reeled in horror that we've got these thieves at the wheel of power who are trying to brush off everybody with their spin, confident that they can step through the minefields and avoid answering questions, avoid accountability, avoid any kind of verification for any of their claims. But the New Zealand public were like, sod that, you know, we can see when we're being ripped off. We can see a thief stealing from the frickin' fridge when it's happening. So this is actually what was happening. There was outrage and protests were underway. And then all of a sudden, a dead cat got thrown on the table, and that was Andrea Vance. Remember all that, the C word business? And that gave the media a big excuse to exit out of the topic altogether and start talking about the use of the fair word, the C word, and how it was really the case that Brooke Van Velden was a big hero and a very big victim here, and that the poor, elite, rich people that were stealing were really, you know, the people we should feel sorry for. So then Andrea Vance collected the award for the Political Journalist of the Year, despite using the C word, and wrote a very good article that kind of explained how she doesn't really apologize to the people that were doing the thievery and the stealing, no matter how much they want to sort of divert the topic away from this. At the same time, we had a situation in Parliament where Judith Collins stood up and rejected that the most racist actions that we've seen in recent history were actually racist at all, which, if you do look back at history, is very consistent with racism, whether it's the slavers, bringing people over from Africa and putting them to work in a life of service and misery. That wasn't racist according to the people doing it at all. Or whether you look at a regime like the apartheid regime in South Africa, where they don't believe there's anything wrong with the racism there and it's not racism, or any of the cotton fields in the southern United States, you know, it was all about property to them, not about racism at all. So racism has never existed to a lot of white people because they've never really experienced it. And just as an aside, this kind of outright denial of racism, or the word being racist, is very popular with a lot of the people from those areas, and a lot of people with white skin who have never experienced racism in their lives because they're very, very privileged, and they rush to people like me at G News and say, you shouldn't use that word because it really doesn't exist. Look, Judith Collins, she's denied it's racist. But whatever you think of that argument about racism and whether it does exist at all, in this case with the Privileges Committee handing out a sentence seven times more harsh than any other sentence for anything similar in the past to a party that represents the Indigenous people of New Zealand, I think that, you know, what we can say here is that the government, which is mostly a white government, have lost any claim to the moral high ground here on the basis that they have not kept the rules or the standards, and they have dangerously lurched towards being a tin pot dictatorship that does not take into account the rules of parliament, that rides roughshod over it. And then when they're called to account, as was the case in Chris Hipkins' speech about this topic, where he pointed out that in the past, we did not even sanction people that got up out of their chair. We did not even care about people that loomed other people. They got no punishment, no sanction, no stand down at all. They had white skin, those people. And the people that are going to be locked out shouldn't have actually been locked out of democracy at all, as in a dictatorship, by means to make the opposition smaller, to make the debate weaker during the budget debates. And suddenly Chris Bishop thought, well, how can we make this worse? How can this be more evil? How can we make it more racist? And he proposed that we delay the debate, because the debate wasn't going well. Really, Chippy was hammering away at everybody, and the truth was on the table. And then we saw Jerry changing his mind, 3 times every 10 seconds, as per usual, unable to really be a speaker that anyone has any confidence in, always landing on the side of the government that he belongs to, and therefore undermining the neutrality of the position of speaker. As far as I'm concerned, that's my opinion. He just completely doesn't really measure up, doesn't hear things, always forgets people's names if they've got brown skin, and just continues to make a mockery of Parliament, really. He is immune, particularly at NZME, where he's never criticised. He's thrown bouquets by Audrey Young, who seems to think that Jerry is perfect and above criticism. And because we haven't seen any criticism of his role, but look at the role and all the things that have happened in the last 18 months. Boy, it's been a shocker. Anyway, so Jerry allowed this debate to be delayed until about the 6th of June, as you recall. And at the time, Chris Hipkins was told to shut up because he was raising the point that Te Pāti Māori won't be able to participate in the debate, which lent further to the claims that Chippy was making, that this is like the kind of thing we see in a tin pot dictatorship in a banana republic. You had people on that committee talking about imprisoning Te Pāti Māori MPs, imprisoning them when they gave no punishment at all to people with white skin that were doing the same kind of things, getting up out of their chairs, crossing the floor, looming over people. So there wasn't anything much left here but racism, and all that Judith could say is, look, as with slavery, as with apartheid in South Africa, and as with the cotton fields in the southern United States, she strongly rejects that there's any racism at all involved in this outlandish racist decision that's going on. So if I was just to pour some light on all of that, that's what I would say is really going on. And we hurried on to get that out of the way because we had a budget day come up. And in that budget, what we began to see is that a lot of curlers had been used in the hair of Nicola Willis. And this began to look like her very special day rather than a day where New Zealand looked at the future for everybody in this country and whether they were going to come out of a period of struggle, and were things back on track as such? Were things going to improve in any way? But no, it was Nicola's special day, and the topic became about what she was wearing, her curlers in her hair, whether she, was a great big success as she sat back down, and various photographs of the smuggery after the punch down on all the people that were robbed of their pay equity, as the elite people in charge managed to transfer wealth from the needy to those that don't need, and kind of widen the gaps further, really, is what this government has done. It's clearly made the case that house prices will increase by about 30% in the forecast period, while your wages will actually stay about half that rate. So you're going to fall further and further and further behind. It's going to get worse and worse and worse under Nicola Willis. So we were just all a bit shocked that pay equity was funding this. Pay equity for low-income women was being transferred to charter schools for David Seymour, bowing low to David Seymour and his 8% party. It was being used to fund things like the Defence Force. It was being used to fund various big payments that were going out to MPs themselves and their pay rises that are coming up. So I think what we saw really was a shocker, an absolute debacle of the claim that we're back on track. The track is really an austerity track, and that is forecast to cut government spending to the bone, to bleed the country in a way that's been proven not to work over and over again. The most recent example is 14 years of a Tory government where the exact austerity programs that are being seen here in New Zealand for all those in need, all those low-income women who now will struggle even further in real terms as they take a massive cut to what they would have earned, is fought by spin, by elite people with millions of dollars rolling in money bins saying black is white, 1 + 1 = 17, and I've got a bridge to sell you. And so a weak media doesn't hold them to account. We don't see any real roastings from Coughlin or from Malpass. They actually are there to fan the heroes of neoliberalism, the current government. They're moving on from these things and kind of clapping and applauding when they can. We've also seen in this period of time a big hole in the polls because Nationalists struggled, and somehow the media haven't managed to actually show us too many polls. I guess we'll be seeing a few now. Now that we've cleared a few days from the budget and the reality of the budget is still being talked about. But wow, it's been 2 months since anyone in New Zealand has seen a Talbot Mills poll, but it's also been 2 months since anyone's seen any kind of commentary in any media by any journalist about why that is the case. So it's an actual media blackout. At the press gallery, no one's allowed to talk about Talbot Mills and how come there's no polls suddenly in the record as soon as Nationals start to struggle. As per usual, when it came to sneaky, deceptive and untrustworthy governments, like we had seen in the past when it was the Hikoi, David Seymour thought, well, I could deceive in full and trick everybody. So what I'll do is I'll slip the first reading of the Regulatory Standards Bill into the shadow of the budget while everyone's talking about that. And I'll get away with something pretty fucking nasty, to be honest. And we'll institute a straitjacket in a constitutional form, and we'll sell it by using hairdressing as the sort of common sense single law, which doesn't represent what this bill is going to really do, which will end up being the same kind of thing we've always seen with the same kind of neoliberals, and that is with their commitment problem to neoliberalism. They want to stitch us all up, make us actually obey, make their version and their values normal, the normative laws that they will call responsible fiscal management, etc., and just basically keep us neoliberal in the dark in an invisible way. And they will take everything that's safe and make it unsafe. They'll deregulate everything. They will bring back a light hand for fiscal management. They will put everyone at risk. Banks will be able to roam free around the world. We'll have another GFC soon. We'll have a big crisis because of the same kind of deregulation that David Seymour and his followers like Christopher Luxon never learn and don't understand about economics at all. And honestly, this is actually just playing out right in front of us. So submissions are there. People are putting their submissions in, which I think are due on the 23rd of June. So get those submissions in. They're going to roll over democracy. They don't care. They hate democracy. They are a dictatorship who are going to ram this through without any kind of mandate. One of my big critics here, a guy called John Chapman, he believes that, first of all, Chippy never said anything about a dictatorship, but he did. And that was in a speech in Hansard. He also thinks that there is no form of anything wrong here going on with the way that these kind of quasi-constitutional takeovers are happening right in front of our eyes, and he's trying to tell the left to calm down and win the argument and just ignore things and let it happen, because whatever the right are doing is not as bad as what the left might be doing. And so he spends all his time attacking this page. But I just think, we should be vigilant, we should be factual, we should shine a light on what's really happening, and take the sort of the bitterness of people that want semi-automatics in their hands, with a grain of salt, and sort of see what their grudges really are here. I don't believe that the real problem is us. I think the problem is that we are sitting here growing and looking at all of these issues, shining a light and a torch on them and bringing them to the fore and talking about them. And I think that's a problem for anyone that really does want semi-automatic weapons back again. Speaking of that, during all of this time in the background, Dame Jacinda Ardern did a fantastic speech up at Yale, which some people watched in its entirety, but it didn't get a lot of coverage in New Zealand because we've got a big thing about not promoting Dame Jacinda Ardern. She is a female after all, and we couldn't have that. We couldn't have a mother. We couldn't have empathy, kindness. We couldn't have any kind of self-doubt. We instead needed this guy with 7 houses and no substance at all. But because he is basically hollow and rich, he gets promoted and propped up by the same people that were saying that Jacinda Ardern lacked substance and it was all, kind of fairy dust that was going to settle. But, 6 years later on, what do we discover? Well, we discovered that Nicola Willis has borrowed more than anybody did under Grant Robertson or Jacinda Ardern. So it's all lies. It's all spin. You are actually being hoodwinked by a media at the moment that is promoting these people, that are letting them off with a little slap on the wrist, that are kind of throwing bouquets at them as often as possible. Chris Bishop got a bouquet today from Audrey Young because, well, he stood up there and said, look at my tie, look at my shirt, look at my coat. Who cares if Nicola Willis does not support New Zealand Made, doesn't care about this country at all, and wears a dress because it's her special day, right? She can choose whatever she wants. It's not budget day, it's her special day. She's got her hair curled, and we're making that the issue. The real issue is really about, pay equity here and stealing, and the way in which the media have allowed that to drop as well. But it shouldn't be allowed to drop, and thank goodness for Marilyn Waring, who was a national MP who stood up to Robert Muldoon, and she's got MPs, I think 10 of them, across the spectrum together to hold a People's Select Committee up and down this country where we can look at the evidence and gather that evidence, because it bothered Marilyn that such a big theft, that such a big change, that such a big rip-off was affecting so many. Was it 180,000 in the unfunded sector alone in government that were actually having all that money ripped off them? I think Craig Rennie said it was an average of $77,000 each in their income over the next forecast period. And what we ended up having here is a massive gap in accountability, as the media were bothered by the fact that they had to spend a week on this, maybe 2 weeks. And thank goodness for Andrea Vance throwing the dead C word cat on the table so we could all just move on and forgive and forget and start talking about Winston being over in India and the FTA over there and anything else other than what really happened here, that massive theft that should change the government if we're all true and we care about each other. Jacinda Ardern's speech at Yale said, look, it's not just about you, it's about us. And she used many examples where New Zealanders do deeply care about each other, and they care about the region, they care about what's going on in South Africa in 1980 in the all-white rugby team that played for the Springboks in a country where the whites were a minority. And she talked about, the French and nuclear testing in the Pacific, because New Zealanders cared about the region, not just themselves. However, people voting for National and ACT these days tend to be the people that don't have self-doubt, don't have a lack of confidence, but they are very, very self-interested and they do not care about the rest of the community. That's kind of what happens, and you end up with these very, very fake and terrible governments that are bordering on corrupt, that are trying to limit the opposition, that are lashing out in racism and rejecting it every step of the way, as all forms of racism come with some kind of rejection, Judith Collins. So, there's no moral high ground here about what you guys have been doing in recent times, as far as any of us can see, and we are the democracy, we are the people, and it is about us, not just about you, as Jacinda said. So we have self-doubt, and it's the self-doubt that actually drives us to do the mahi and do the work and actually know the answers and do the research. And I think we're in behind Marilyn Waring here and the Select Committee. I understand Marjorie McLean's daughter has had a hand in organising this nationwide People's Select Committee up and down New Zealand. So all power to your elbow, as Craig Rennie says. Let's smash this and get the evidence, get the light on the evidence about what should have happened, what Nicola Willis didn't do, what Christopher Luxon refused to do, what this corrupt government wouldn't do and tried to hurry on with its spin doctory. So, let's expose them. Let's hold them to account. Let's make this government accountable. This is how democracy works, and New Zealanders should care about all of us. We just saw today as well another episode of Locked In, I think it is, by Craig Rennie, and he had a chap called Nick, who's a disability advocate, come on. And they're really, really worried. They've had $1 billion nicked off them by this government, thank you very much, who have taken the money away from disabled people who know how to set up systems and avoid bureaucracy and support themselves, and just dumped it into the health budget. Thank you very much. There are also some concerns there about the way in which there is now a risk involved in the budget that people who were abused in state care will not get any kind of decent compensation because of the way that this government runs things with an austerity and a cost focus. They will be cutting that back and they'll be making it unfair and inadequate. So it's the injustice all the time that's present. It's this injustice that's going on against the weak and the people that need help, the injustice against them, the injustice against the Indigenous, the injustice from the white privileges stack committee that wants to put them in prison for something that is equivalent to the actions of white people that didn't get any punishment at all. I mean, that is just morally incorrect. It's terrible that we have a government that is carrying on like this and a press that's on their side and too afraid to hold them to account for this and moving on as fast as it can. So that's a bit of a rant, but G News is back. There's probably a bit more here. We've actually seen the Reserve Bank do something extremely predictable, which was a 25-point decrease in the OCR. So what? Basically, Christian Hawkesby has been in charge of the prudential price stability side of our economy for a long time. So it made no sense that Luke Malpass was making a big deal about how this was the first time he'd fronted a decision with the OCR. But Christian is a very, very capable and competent person with heaps of experience, and he wouldn't have been the deputy governor if it hadn't have been for that. So I just think Malpass is a waste of space, basically, when it comes to the posts. And I also think Tracy Watkins has been John Key's biggest fan over the years. So we've got sort of a loaded media with, a sort of a National Party bent in Auckland and in Wellington. So the two biggest cities are actually dominated. We're being suffocated by commercial enterprises that have self-interest at heart. They believe in free enterprise. They are to the right, and they like to argue that they're to the left, but the basis of that argument is really comes down to just how many complaints they've received on either side. So I don't think that there's any objective measure other than the fact that all of these emissions, all of this moving on, all of this care and protection of their crony mates that pay for their advertising and revenue speaks much louder than anything they may say about themselves. And then there was Q&A, and Nicola Willis appeared on Q&A in front of Jack Tame, and everyone watched the way in which she couldn't explain that none of the 3 child poverty targets that she had set and committed to and absolutely were going to actually achieve, according to Christopher Luxon in the pre-election debates, had been achieved, or and she didn't have any arguments or reasons, that could justify why she was off target. There were other things in that interview that were just shocking, like the way she tried to openly lie about how the Haifu was somehow after Liberation Day, which was on the 2nd of April 2025, when Trump announced all of his initial tariffs. But the Haifu was in December 2024, and Jack Tame had to hold her to account. Such was the brazen dishonesty on display on Q&A, but it just passes by everyone because, well, I suppose maybe 70 or 80,000 people watched Q&A, which is a small drop in the bucket. It's less than 1% of the electorate. So we all sail on completely unaware, thinking National are good when they're not. They're just rubbish. And that was like a good pick apart by Jack Tame, who really smashed a whole lot of aspects of this budget into oblivion, which was good to see as he ripped Nicola Willis a new one. We also saw that the Greens were busy selling their alternative budget, and it looked a whole lot better. It looked a whole lot nicer. It involved a little bit more spending in some areas, but nothing too radical. But anything outside the neoliberal straitjacket of getting the debt down, worrying without evidence about debt, and not talking about how many assets we've got, what can be made liquid. People will just tend to be conservative in senior roles and influence everyone underneath them. That national and its austerity and its debt worries are the way to go. So let's all just suffer and have premature deaths in a health system that falls apart, which is what's going on. Real term cuts all over the place in health, more of the same misery. All of the things that the government promised to do when people voted for change have actually not materialized. Things have gone backwards in just about every single measure. And we are sitting here today looking at the facts, looking at the evidence and going, look at how bad this government is and how it just carries on and sails on with its supportive media, making this go on and on and on. A big gap in the polls, like I've mentioned before. But anyway, I don't want to be too negative. I just want to say hi to everyone. It's good to be back in the saddle. There was a lot more that went on. You've got Erica, kind of just saying what's really going on, which again is racist, and then being caught out again and making excuses. And because she's the corporate golden girl in the mood of the boardroom with the hand-selected audience picked by Fran O'Sullivan, who loved aspects of this ruthless government and its budget, it just kind of gets a pass when it shouldn't. It's totally unacceptable. We've now got Winston banging on like Trump, and, he's been impervious to what happened in the Australian election, impervious to what happened in Canada, and thinking he can still be Trump, New Zealand style, banging on about woke, which is really, about kind of being vigilant about discrimination, being vigilant about racism, being a person that cares about us, a person with empathy, a person that might have some self-doubts, as Dame Jacinda said, and a person that cares about evidence instead of just racing on with what the latest political editor appointed under a kind of a national government to a position of influence and power is rabbiting on about. And the selected polling from the Atlas think tank, the Taxpayers Union, is our only measure. So anyway, I'm just going to leave it right there. But welcome back to G News, and we'll be fully back once we kind of recover from everything that's happened in the last 10 days. But I just wanted to do that summary. So welcome back, and good to see you all again.